Greetings, thrill seekers. I am the master programmer, curator of forbidden knowledge and dark tales. Today, I bring you 3 extraordinary stories unearthed by Lilith, our AI researcher who delves into ancient texts, secret rituals, and forbidden knowledge. These tales, often hidden away by secret covens or government agencies, challenge our understanding of the world. So, if you're looking for a fright, something scary to watch at night, stay with us as we delve into these 3 extraordinary tales. First in, The Black Star. A journalist discovers a hidden cult preparing for a ritual under an eerie celestial event. The Black Star is rising, and something sinister is waiting. Next in, The Dark Veil. A detective uncovers a mysterious cult whose ritual unlocks powers beyond our world. But now, he's become part of their terrifying plan. Finally, in The Serpent's Wake, a drifter stumbles upon a desert town with a dark secret, one that awakens an ancient, hungry force. These stories are not for the faint of heart, so sit back, turn down the lights, and listen to the eerie tales Lilith has uncovered. And if you enjoy our content, please subscribe to our channel for more chilling stories and dark discoveries. Welcome to another journey into the unknown, brought to you by the.darkfiles. Coldwater was small. The only thing that set it apart from any other forgotten speck on the map were the rumors. Whispers of strange gathering in the woods, of symbols carved into old buildings, and people who disappeared without a trace. Most shrugged it off, but Evelyn Hale wasn't like most people. Evelyn, a journalist from the city, had been sent to Coldwater to cover what her editor called harmless local weirdness. She was expecting small-town gossip and overblown ghost stories, but as she dug into the town's history, she found something far darker. The first thing that caught her attention was a name: the Children of the Black Star. It kept popping up in old news articles, in whispers from the elderly, even in police reports that seemed to stop just short of the truth. No one knew much about the group, but Evelyn found hints of rituals, of blood, and a cycle that repeats itself every 20 years. The last incident had been 2 decades ago, and Coldwater had been quiet since. One name stood out above the others: Amelia Crowley, a local woman who had vanished 20 years ago, just before the last known cycle of strange events. Her family's mansion, now abandoned, sat on the edge of town, crumbling into the earth. People said it was cursed, that anyone who went near it felt watched by something in the woods. Determined to learn more, Evelyn visited the Crowley estate as the sun began to set. The house loomed before her, its windows dark and empty, the air thick with the smell of rot and neglect. She slipped inside, her flashlight barely cutting through the dust-filled gloom. The mansion had been left to decay, untouched for decades, but it wasn't empty. In the grand parlor, beneath a thick layer of dust, Evelyn found an old journal. The leather was cracked, but the pages inside were still intact. It was a record kept by Amelia Crowley herself. As Evelyn flipped through the pages, a chill settled over her. The journal detailed Amelia's invitation into the Children of the Black Star. They weren't just a group of harmless eccentrics. They were a cult, and their rituals were no mere superstition. Every 20 years, when the Black Star aligned with the full moon, they performed a ceremony to summon something ancient, something dark. And tonight, the Black Star was set to rise again. The door creaked behind her. Evelyn spun around, her heart pounding. A man stood in the doorway, dressed in black. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, watching her with cold intent.
You shouldn't have come here.
Before Evelyn could respond, two more figures appeared, their faces hidden beneath the hoods. They grabbed her, pulling her towards the basement. She struggled, but their grip was iron, dragging her down into the dark. In the basement, an altar stood in the center of the room, lit by flickering candles. The man from upstairs stood at the altar, his hands raised as he began to chant. The air grew heavy, vibrating with a strange energy that made Evelyn's skin crawl. She knew, without needing to be told, that the ritual was beginning. She had to act fast. Her eyes darted to the journal in her hand, now glowing faintly with symbols she hadn't noticed before. The book wasn't just a history, it was a guide. Somewhere in its pages was a key to stopping them. As the chants grew louder, Evelyn flipped through the journal, her hands shaking. The symbols pulsed, the air crackled, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. The black star was rising. She found the passage she was looking for, a counter ritual written in a language she didn't understand, but somehow knew she could speak. She whispered the words, her voice barely audible over the chanting. But as she continued, the candles flickered, and the cultist faltered. The leader turned, his face contorted with fury, but it was too late. The power in the room shifted, the energy recoiling as if the ritual had been severed. The black star's light dimmed, and the tremors stopped. Evelyn bolted from the room, the journal clutched tightly in her hands, her pulse pounding in her ears. The cult members were still inside, powerless and broken, but she knew this wasn't over. She stumbled into the night, the cold air biting at her skin as she ran. The black star had been stopped, for now. But Evelyn knew the children of the black star weren't done. The ritual had failed, but they would try again. They always did. Coldwater was quiet once more, but beneath the surface, something ancient still stirred. And when the black star aligned again, Evelyn knew they would be waiting. Ashworth wasn't the kind of city where things went missing. Yet over the past few months, people had been disappearing. Dozens of them. Most of the city's residents had dismissed it, chalking it up to usuals. Runaways, crime, the unexplainable. But Maya Rivers was different. She refused to accept that her brother, Evan, had just vanished without a trace. That's how Jack Mitchell, private investigator, found himself with a new case. Maya came to him with a notebook she had found in her brother's apartment. It was filled with strange symbols, names of people who had disappeared, and repeated references to something called the Dark Veil. The police weren't interested, but Jack? He had seen enough of the weird in his line of work to know when to pay attention. As he dug into Evan's life, Jack uncovered a pattern. All the people missing seemed to be connected to an old part of the city, a forgotten, crumbling neighborhood where time seemed to have stopped. The more Jack looked, the more he found references to the Dark Veil, a cult older than the city itself, whose influence was far greater than anyone dared acknowledge. One night, Jack found himself wandering those decaying streets. The air was thick with the smell of rot and old brick. Abandoned buildings lined the alleyways like crooked teeth, and there, scratched into the side of one of them, was the symbol from Evan's notebook. A circle with a jagged line through its center. It pulsed with something Jack couldn't quite explain. At the end of the alley, he found an old iron door, nearly rusted shut. The same symbol was carved into its surface. Without thinking, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dark and cold. lit only by a circle of candles placed on the stone floor. A group of hooded figures stood at the center, chanting in a language Jack didn't understand. He stayed in the shadows, watching, his breath caught in his throat. At the center of the circle was a man, bound, terrified, lying on the altar. Evan. Jack's heart raced as he recognized the man. Before he could react, one of the hooded figures stepped forward, raising a gleaming dagger. Jack's instincts screamed at him to move, but something about the air, thick and charged, held him in place. The leader of the group, a tall, gaunt man, turned towards Jack without warning. His face remained hidden, but Jack felt those unseen eyes pierce him.
"You're too late,"
the man said, his voice low and steady. Jack stepped forward, pulling his gun, his voice rough. "Let him go." The man chuckled softly, lowering the dagger just slightly.
"You don't understand what you've walked into. This ritual, it's not what you think."
"I don't care what it is," Jack replied, his grip tightening on his gun. "You're gonna let him go. I swear." The leader raised a hand, cutting him off.
"You're interrupting something ancient. This city, this world, we are preparing for a new order. We are unlocking a power that goes beyond your understanding."
Before Jack could respond, the ground trembled beneath his feet. The air felt like it was bending, reality itself warping around him. The candles flickered, and then suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. A whisper rose in the air, louder than anything Jack had ever heard. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, ancient and terrifying. Jack's feet moved on their own as he stumbled backward, the iron door slamming shut behind him. He found himself standing in the alley, the night air sharp against his skin. He wanted to run, to leave this place far behind, but he couldn't. Not yet. Evan was still inside, and now he knew just how deep this went. Jack returned to the alley, determined to find a way back in, but the iron door was gone. The symbol on the wall had been scratched away, leaving nothing but a blank, crumbling surface. He searched for hours, but the entrance had vanished as if it never existed. The dark veil wasn't finished. They had simply slipped back into the shadows, waiting for the next time the stars aligned in their favor. And Jack knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. He had seen too much. The cult was out there, watching, preparing, and Jack had become something far larger than himself, whether he liked it or not. Jonah was always suspicious of people who were too friendly. Years of drifting from place to place had taught him that nothing in this world came without a price. He'd grown used to moving through towns unnoticed, avoiding deep conversations and keeping his head down. But Arroyo Wells, that was a different kind of place. When he first rolled in, the desert town had the same sun-bleached look as all the others he'd passed through. A few dusty streets, old buildings with peeling paint, and a scattering of people going about their lives. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. From the moment he arrived, people had been warm. Strangers waved at him from porches. A woman at the general store offered him free coffee. The mechanic gave him a discount on a tire repair. Everyone seemed to know his name by the second day. Jonah kept his distance at first, nodding politely, but staying guarded. He figured it would only be a matter of time before someone asked for something in return. But as the days turned into weeks, something strange happened. He started to feel comfortable. The kindness of the townsfolk slowly began to chip away at his wariness. They didn't ask for anything, not really. They just seemed to enjoy his company. Carl, the owner of the local whiskey bar, invited him to play cards with the locals one night. Mrs. Tanner at the diner always set aside a piece of pie for him. Even old Mr. Cobb, who ran the motel, kept telling him he could stay a little longer if he needed. Soon, Jonah found himself lingering longer than he ever expected. For the first time in years, he wondered if maybe this was the kind of place he could stop drifting, settle down, and stay put for a while. The people seemed to genuinely like him, and the weight of constantly being on the move started to lift from his shoulders. Maybe a Royal Wells was different. One evening, after a long day of working odd jobs around the town, Carl slid a cold beer across the bar to Jonah, smiling that same friendly smile Jonah had grown used to seeing. "On the house," Carl said with a casual wink. "Thanks," Jonah said, taking the beer. By now, he was used to the kindness. It didn't set off any alarm bells the way it had before. Carl leaned a bit closer, lowering his voice. "We're having a little get-together tonight, out by the canyons. Sort of a tradition around here. Thought you might want to come along, see what makes this place special." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "What kind of tradition?" "Nothing too wild. Just the whole town coming together for a bit. You know how it is in places like this. Traditions keep us connected." For a moment, that old wariness crept back in, but Carl's smile was disarming, and Jonah had been in the town long enough to feel like maybe this was the kind of place where people genuinely cared for each other. He hadn't felt that in a long time. "All right," Jonah said after a moment, taking a swig of his beer. "Why not?" Later that night, Carl picked him up in his old truck. They drove out into the desert, the last traces of sunlight fading from the sky as the road twisted into the jagged canyons outside of town. The landscape was vast and still, the kind of place where the world felt endless and empty. Jonah sat in the passenger seat, watching the stars begin to blink into view, feeling a sense of calm that might have been foreign to him for so long. Maybe this was the kind of place he could call home. But when they reached the clearing, something in the air shifted. A group of people, maybe a dozen or so, stood in a wide circle around a large bonfire. Their faces were mostly hidden beneath the brims of their hats, but Jonah recognized many of them. The woman from the diner, the mechanic, the people who'd smile at him on the street. They all wore the same serene, peaceful expressions. Carl led him into the circle, patting him on the back. "Go on, don't be shy." Jonah smiled nervously, but as he looked around, his smile faltered. Something was wrong. He took a step back, but the group closed in tighter. A figure emerged from the firelight, the mayor, holding a tall staff carved in the shape of a serpent's head. His eyes locked on Jonah, his face serious, almost reverent. "The serpent stirs," the mayor intoned, his voice carrying over the wind. "Tonight, we offer it a worthy sacrifice." Jonah's pulse quickened. "Sacrifice?" He looked around, heart pounding. "What is this?" Carl's smile disappeared, his expression becoming cold. "The serpent must be fed." Realization slammed into Jonah like a freight train. All the kindness, all the smiles, it had all been for this. They'd been grooming him from the moment he stepped into town. He wasn't a guest. He was prey. "You're insane," Jonah muttered, trying to push his way through the crowd, but the strong hands grabbed his arms, holding him in place. "Let me go." The mayor stepped closer, the fire reflecting off the serpent staff. "You've been chosen, Jonah. You should feel honored." The ground trembled beneath their feet, a low rumbling like a groan of something deep within the earth. The townspeople began to chant, their voices rhythmic, calling out to something Jonah couldn't see but could feel. Something ancient, something alive beneath the sand. "Stop," Jonah shouted, thrashing against the hands holding him, but they were too strong. The mayor raised a blade, its edge gleaming in the firelight. "Blood for the serpent," he said, "so it may wake." The ground shook harder now, and Jonah could hear it. Something was moving below. The sand rippled, the fire flickered wildly, and the chant grew louder. Panic surged through Jonah. He yanked his arm free and drove his elbow into the ribs of the man holding him. Breaking free, he stumbled towards the cliffs, but the crowd rushed after him, their faces still serene, still calm, as if this were all routine. Jonah sprinted, his legs burning, the earth trembling beneath him. He could feel it now, the serpent, its presence pressing against his mind, an overwhelming force that made it hard to breathe. His heart pounded, his vision blurred, but he couldn't stop. Behind him, the chanting grew louder, the voices blending into one terrible hum that vibrated in his bones. The fire roared. The ground split open, and from the cracks in the earth, Jonah saw it. Something vast, writhing beneath the surface. The serpent. Its coils rippled under the sand, a monstrous shape moving toward him, unstoppable. Jonah reached the edge of the cliffs, panting, heart racing. The drop was steep, the rocks below jagged and unforgiving, but the serpent's pull was stronger than anything he had ever felt. The ground cracked open, the sand swirling in a frenzy. Jonah turned, eyes wide with terror, as the serpent's massive form began to rise from the earth, its scales shimmering in the firelight, its eyes burning with an ancient hunger. The cult was close now, chanting louder, their hands reaching out for him. Jonah's heart raced as the serpent loomed closer, its enormous head breaking through the surface, its jaws opening wide, ready to devour. He had no choice. With one final burst of adrenaline, Jonah hurled himself over the edge, falling into the abyss below as the roar of the serpent echoed through the canyons. The last thing he heard was the chanting, the cold, steady rhythm of the serpent's wake, before the darkness swallowed him whole. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our page to stay updated. Stay vigilant. The unknown is always closer than you think.